Hi, welcome to MediatorPodcast.com, a podcast and video series about mediation, negotiation, and collaboration. My name is Melissa Gragg, and I provide online valuation and divorce mediation services in St. Louis, Missouri. During this episode, we will discuss leadership, team coaching, and conflict resolution for business with Ben Papa. He's actually a leadership coach and Enneagram teacher in Nashville, Tennessee, but works with companies and clients around the country. You're actually using a lot of this knowledge because you became an Enneagram teacher and you now work with companies, small companies, large companies, when they have sort of conflicts within the ranks. And so for you, what is conflict resolution for businesses? Because I always see it with couples, and I see partnership disputes as well. But what are you really coming in for conflict resolution in a business environment?
Yeah, so it can look like lots of different things. The example I just gave you is one of them was more of a leader than the other one, but they weren't part of the leadership team proper. So what I will use to give you some concrete examples is working with a leadership team or an executive team. So if you think about that, there's basically three different ways kind of conflict shows up, just to put some themes around it. One is overt conflict between two people or two camps, or sometimes three people or three camps. But there are clearly delineated lines of conflict and they know what's going on. That's the one that's most like the divorce work I used to do. I mean, clients would come to me and there would be a divorce on file. We knew there was a conflict. We knew what it meant. And we all were kind of showing up with that in mind. So sometimes I'll work with people and that's what's going on. And so then it's the most like what the work that you do or that I used to do, which is kind of figuring out what are the specific issues? How do we resolve the issues? What agreements do we need to make? And where are the spaces where we just need to figure out a way to agree to disagree? So that's one. I will tell you that's probably less common than the other two. It's kind of all I did before. It's probably all you do now. It's the less likely of the three that I deal with now. Mostly because that stuff gets resolved pretty quickly, or you start to see some pretty big impacts on the business that the board of directors gets involved in, or other kinds of things pretty quickly. So the other two, one is what I would just call sort of subtle interpersonal conflict, which is where people may not even fully know or fully acknowledge that they're in conflict with each other. They just know that they're out of sync and they stay out of sync and they're not sure why. And sometimes it's causing some problems downstream for their teams or other people on the leadership team. Sometimes it's just limited to the two of them. But to say the CFO and the COO, they're just stuck and they keep getting in each other's way. They keep bumping up against something and they're just not sure what. And it's just this subtle sort of drag on the effectiveness of the leadership team in general. Their teams in particular, but the leadership team in general. Because good leadership teams all have each other's back and they're all looking out for all the different parts of the company at the same time with a certain out of their area, but they're really looking at, we're leading this company as a whole. So that's one thing. And so I'll come in with them and we'll do some assessments and we'll figure out what's going on. And then the way coaching works is you start off with assessments, but then you say, what are we going to do with this information? So if you and I are struggling on a leadership team and I know you're a 7 and I'm a 1, okay, well, that's fine. But we got to use that in some way for this to be helpful for a business. To get an ROI on working with me or people like me, you got to be solving some kind of a business problem. And so we've got to be able to get in better collaborative strength with each other. We've got to communicate more clearly. We need our teams communicating clearly. We need to be messaging things to our teams that are similar, or there's a business impact that you and I are responsible for as leaders of the company. So that's the second example. And last but not least, and this is probably the most common, is straight up conflict avoidance, which is people talk about conflict all the time and they think of fighting. And really the biggest issue around conflict that I see is conflict avoidance. There are conversations that need to happen that are not happening. There are people that know they don't like something and they're just avoiding it in some way or whatever. So this is sort of in between the other two. They know it's there. It's a little bit more common for people, but they're not willing to deal with it. Mm-hmm. So oftentimes this can relate to the CEO. So if the CEO is kind of the emperor with no clothes, it can sometimes be hard for the rest of the leadership team to address him or her or address those issues in a clean, honest, effective, constructive way because they don't want to get into conflict with their boss, the person that
Mhm.
runs the whole organization. So conflict avoidance is another thing I work on. And all we're trying to do with all of these modalities, to answer your question in a more summary way, is we're trying to deepen the effectiveness of the team. The company, to be profitable and successful, needs an effective leadership team that's self-aware, that collaborates, that can get into action in a right-sized way, that's strategizing, thinking, all of that kind of stuff. And they've got to show up as good human beings to be able to do that.
Mhm.
Does that answer your
Well,
question?
yeah, no, I think that's very important because I think that, part of what we witness in any type of mediation situation is that there are things that are unsaid, and I thought I kind of liked how I dealt with it. I would talk about financial things. Financial things are hard to talk about, and people have a lot of guilt around it or, old habits and things like that. And I was like, well, just talk about money, just like it's not positive or negative, right? Just talk about money as it's money or introduce a topic, in a mediation that may erupt some emotions, but we at least then deal with it in some capacity. So I think that I see that more often than not.